Opponents just entering the ring. Bobby Fulton, Tommy Rogers from the City of Angels. Be fantastic.
Thomas Couch was born May 14, 1961 in St. Petersburg, Florida. An amateur wrestler in high school, Tommy grew up watching championship wrestling from Florida with his dad, where he became a fan of wrestlers like Dusty Rhodes, Bugsy McGraw, and Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Once in college, Tommy befriended Brett Woyan, who was a wrestler working under the name Brett Sawyer. That friendship would eventually lead to one of the most accidental career starts in professional wrestling history. Brett's brother Bruce, who wrestled under the name Buzz Sawyer, came to Florida after a stint in the Carolinas. The brothers would ride the matches in the area together, but on one occasion, Brett was not available, and Buzz asked Tommy if he would like to ride along with him to Tampa. Excited to get the chance to see wrestling live and sit with the friends of the wrestlers, Tommy jumped on the offer. Only 30 minutes after arriving, Buzz came to Tommy and told him a wrestler named Charlie Cook was in a car accident. Tommy's amateur background would make him a serviceable replacement for Cook's match against Eddie Mansfield. After a considerable amount of coaxing, finding Tommy some ring gear, and Jack Briscoe giving him the name Tommy Peters, Tommy made his reluctant debut, losing to Mansfield in a match he would later say he barely remembered because he was so nervous. After that match, Tommy received a payday of $100 and was even asked for autographs from some of the fans. Tommy had never even dreamed he would be a pro wrestler before that first match, but by the end of the day, he was hooked. Rogers would go on to job in a few more house shows, receiving on-the-fly instructions from Jack and Jerry Briscoe, before following Buzz Sawyer to Georgia for his genuine start in pro wrestling. Once in Georgia, Rogers trained with Buzz as well as Bob and Brad Armstrong, learning the psychology of pro wrestling and sharpening his in-ring skills. Bob Armstrong was booking Georgia at the time and gave the newly dubbed Tommy Rogers his first TV match, a loss to Austin Idol on Georgia Championship Wrestling. Rogers was primarily being used in opening matches and jobbing to stars like Kevin Sullivan and the Great Kabuki, but it may have been a situation of being in the right place at the right time. While not the biggest guy on the roster, Rogers' good looks and impressive physique was catching the eye of the young ladies in the crowd and watching on TV, while his in-ring development was impressing the powers that be in Georgia. Wanting a place to work with different wrestlers and get more seasoning, in early 1982, Tommy joined his friend Brett Sawyer, who had gone to Portland the previous December. A small territory that got little attention outside the Pacific Northwest, Rogers would benefit from a small push upon arrival in Portland. Rogers picked up several wins against enhancement talent and even got DQ wins over the likes of Stan Stasiak and Buddy Rose. Rogers would also tag several times with Sawyer and even had a few shots at the Pacific Northwest Tag Team titles as Chris Adams' partner, though they would fail to take the belts from Rip Oliver and the Assassin. After more than a year in Portland, Rogers was ready to travel back south and move on to Southeastern Championship Wrestling based in Alabama. With junior heavyweights becoming popular at the time, it was a good move for Rogers, who won his first championship on May 2, 1983, when he defeated Bill Ash for the NWA United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. Rogers would briefly feud with Ash over the title, but after 49 days as champion would lose the belt to Jake Donovan, who then meet Rogers in the loser leaves town match. After a quick run in the Memphis-based CWA, where among others Rogers first met another young junior heavyweight named Bobby Fulton, he headed back to Georgia. Appearing on the highly popular World Championship Wrestling with TV being broadcast on superstation WTBS, Rogers got what was his highest profile position to date. Rogers was immediately given a big push as a junior heavyweight, defeating NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion Les Thornton in a non-title match in Macon, Georgia, in his first match back in the territory. Over the next 7 months, Rogers had an incredible series of matches against Thornton, defeating the British star on several occasions, but always falling short of winning the championship. Aside from chasing the World Junior Heavyweight Championship, Rogers had something of a TV feud with Ted DiBiase over who had the best power slam, though there was never any real payoff to that storyline. Tommy was also dabbling in tag team wrestling with partners as varied as Brad Armstrong and Tully Blanchard. By late June of 1984, Rogers moved on again, this time to Mid-South Wrestling, where the rest of his career would be defined. James Hines was born October 4th, 1960 in Chillicothe, Ohio. A lifelong wrestling fan who dreamed of stepping into the ring, the future Bobby Fulton grew up watching big-time wrestling out of Detroit with stars like The Sheik, Abdullah the Butcher, and Wild Bill Curry. At only 11 years old, Fulton managed to get in with an outlaw wrestling promotion in Chillicothe run by veteran wrestler Hank Best, helping to set up and tear down the ring for shows. After 5 years on the ring crew of the local promotion, a 16-year-old Fulton was itching to get his start as a wrestler and took a shot in the dark. Writing a letter to wrestler and promoter Ken Jugan, an independent promoter in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, Fulton was asked to come to Clarksburg, West Virginia on the day of an outlaw show. Talking his father into taking him on the 175-mile trip, Fulton met with Jugan, who, after seeing how young he was, told him there was no way he was going to let him wrestle in his ring. As it turned out, 2 wrestlers didn't show up, so Fulton and another aspiring wrestler with no experience named Joseph Shetlock were put on the card in a match against each other. Fulton's first match lasted only 3 minutes, with the 2 rookies essentially getting into a real fight and both locker rooms emptying to pull them apart. Fulton was paid $5 for that first match, and it only inspired him to try harder. Fulton's father was behind him getting into wrestling to the point he talked to Jugan about getting some proper trunks and boots and gave the go-ahead for Fulton to have other matches in Jugan's promotion. Fulton would make appearances at shows in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, even working some small WWF shows before landing in the NWA's Mid-America territory based in Tennessee. Another small territory that got little attention outside of its local reach, Fulton would be put in a tag team with his kayfabe brother Don Fulton, who would go on to be known as Eric Embry. Fulton would quickly be put into some high-profile matches, even getting a shot at the territory's World Six-Man Tag Team Championship with Embry and Dennis Condrey, though they would fail to win the titles. In early 1980, Fulton made what might be some of the most important stops in his development, heading to Canada to work in Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. Though he mostly worked lower and mid-card and lost more than he won, he gained great experience facing opponents like Jim Neidhart, Bret Hart, and even facing his former brother Eric Embry. Fulton would later work briefly in Kansas City, getting the opportunity to work around established stars like Harley Race, Bruiser Brody, and Dick the Bruiser. Another stint in the short-lived secondary Georgia territory saw Fulton teamed with Terry Taylor as the Fantastic Ones, a takeoff on the Fabulous Ones Steve Keirn and Stan Lane. By April of 1982, Fulton would land in what became his first long-standing territory, the Memphis-based CWA. While he didn't strap a rocket to his back, Fulton did get in good with the powers that be in the CWA and proved to be a solid lower mid-card wrestler. By July of 1982, Fulton found himself tagging with established stars like Dutch Mantell and gaining notoriety as an up-and-coming junior heavyweight. Fulton would later say the top stars and promoters in Memphis helped him greatly as he had little money at the time. When the heater malfunctioned in his car, causing it to blow full blast on his feet, and Fulton could barely afford the gas to get around as it was, he rode to matches with Bill Dundee. With the help of other talent and Christine Jarrett, Memphis is where Fulton truly started learning the business and learning how to budget money and prepare for leaner times. In November of 1983, Bobby decided to leave Memphis and try other territories, leading to a decision that may have changed a small part of wrestling history. During a quick swim through St. Louis, Fulton was asked by the Moondogs to work a dark match for the WWF, who were running a show at the Kiel Auditorium. Fulton agreed, tagging with a wrestler named Brian Madden and losing to the Moondogs in about 9 minutes. Bobby already had plans to move on to Texas, but he caught the eye of someone in the WWF who thought Fulton reminded him of Eddie Gilbert. In the very early days of Vince McMahon's national expansion attempt, the WWF made an offer to Fulton, which he turned down, as he was already in Texas and happy there. Making his Texas-based Southwest Championship Wrestling debut in February 1984, Fulton almost immediately started feuding with exotic Adrian Street. The quick-cut feud climaxed with Fulton defeating Street for the Southwest Junior Heavyweight Championship in a loser leaves town match at the Hamas Fair Arena in San Antonio on March 25, 1984. With the belt around his waist, another feud was sure to come, and it did, in the form of a familiar face to Fulton. Eric Embry would defeat Fulton for the title after 69 days, but Fulton would get the championship back by June of 1984. The feud culminated in a scaffold match between Fulton and Embry at Freeman Coliseum in San Antonio on July 1, 1984, with the title on the line. Embry would come out the winner, but Fulton was already set for a partnership that lasted the rest of his career. Tag team wrestling was at the height of its popularity in the 1980s, with the Von Erichs feud with the Freebirds in Dallas, the rise of the Road Warriors in Atlanta, and teams like the Fabulous Ones, the Rock and Roll Express, and the Midnight Express traveling around the Southern Territories. Every promotion was looking for the next big tag team. The Rock and Roll Express had been feuding with the Midnight Express in Mid-South, but were headed back to Memphis. Bill Watts wanted to create a new tag team to put against the Midnight Express, then comprised of Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton with manager Jim Cornette. Watts looked to the two young wrestlers he had seen on a previous trip to Memphis, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. Watts flew Fulton and Rogers into Shreveport and laid out his plans for a tag team. He would later fly them into Bixby, Oklahoma to shoot a music video set to ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man, complete with a Ford coupe reminiscent of the car used in the ZZ Top videos at the time. Sharp Dressed Man would be used as the team's entrance music as they made their way to the ring wearing tuxedo-inspired gear complete with top hats. Taking the name of Bobby Fulton's short-lived tag team with Terry Taylor, the Fantastic Ones, the name was shortened to the less clunky and far less obvious rip-off of the Fabulous Ones, the Fantastics. Fulton was seemingly fine with the idea, but Rogers hated it. Having grown up on the no-nonsense Florida wrestling, which had few gimmicks and was centered more on athletic ability and in-ring skills, wearing what might have been confused with a male stripper outfit wasn't what Rogers had in mind. Still, being a good soldier and not wanting to say no to one of the most prominent promoters in wrestling, Rogers gave it a shot. The Fantastics made their in-ring debut on a taping of the Mid-South television show at the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana, defeating Barry Orton and Pat Rose. It wouldn't be long before Rogers and Fulton were feuding with the Midnight Express over the Mid-South tag team titles, with a little unintentional spark provided in New Orleans. After a match between Jim Duggan and Hercules Hernandez, Cornette was being held down to have his head shaved. In actuality, Cornette was only supposed to have his head shaved into a burr with the battery-operated clippers he had provided himself. When the clippers didn't work, Fulton showed up in the ring with shaving cream and a Bic razor, taking more hair than originally intended. A series of six-man tag team matches followed, with Duggan and the Fantastics teaming against the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette, with Cornette wearing a mask to cover his bald head. On July 29, 1984, Tommy and Bobby got their first traditional tag match against Condrey and Eaton, with the Fantastics beating the Midnight Express in Oklahoma City. The Fantastics topped the Midnight several times through August, finally getting a match with the Mid-South tag titles on the line in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Fantastics won, but by disqualification, so the Midnight Express kept the belts. This scenario played out several times over the next few weeks, with the Fantastics coming away with the DQ win, but not the belts. Finally, matchmaker Grizzly Smith arranged for a televised contract signing between the teams with a no disqualification stipulation. It was added that neither team could substitute, and the match must be Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers against Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton. Once the contracts were signed, the Midnights attacked Rogers and Fulton, hitting them both with vicious chair shots. With both Fulton and Rogers hampered after the beating, the Midnight Express won the no DQ match. That set the tone for the feud between the Fantastics and the Midnight Express over the next several weeks. With other no DQ matches and even a couple of cage matches, Fulton and Rogers would always fall short of winning the tag titles. By late October of 1984, the Rock and Roll Express were due to return to the Mid-South, and the Fantastics looked to take their skills elsewhere. They didn't have far to go as they headed east on I-20 toward World-Class Championship Wrestling. World-Class wasted no time getting Bobby and Tommy into main event matches. The Fantastics' World-Class debut was on October 21st, 1984 at a card in San Antonio as they faced some familiar opponents. Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey came into World Class for one night to give Fulton and Rogers a World Class debut win. The very next night at a TV taping in Fort Worth, the Fantastics defeated Scott and Bill Irwin to win the American Tag Team Championship at the Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum. On October 27th, Bobby and Tommy defended the tag titles against El Diablo Grande and Kelly Kiniski at the Wrestling Star Wars card at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Less than a week into their tenure in World Class, the Fantastics were already champions and had made a title defense at one of the biggest cards of the year. Fans immediately took to the young tag team, who were perfect babyfaces for Dallas territory. Athletic, hard-working, respectable men who moved quick in the ring and could sell. They even caught the eye of Dusty Hill, one of the founding members of ZZ Top, who asked to meet with the tag team and invited them to his private bar in Houston. Of course, with the American Tag Team belts around their waists, it was only a matter of time before a feud would come their way, and it did in the form of Norvell Austin and Koko B. Ware, at least briefly. Known as the Pretty Young Things, Ware and Austin were disposed of rather quickly by the Fantastics as Rogers and Fulton defeated the PYTs in spot and house shows and successfully defended the American Tag belts against them at the Thanksgiving Day Star Wars card at Reunion Arena. Austin and Ware served as good opponents, but turned out to be just a warm-up until December when three familiar faces made their way into World Class full-time. By the middle of December 1984, the Midnight Express were regulars in World Class and obvious contenders for the American Tag titles. The Fantastics defeated Eaton and Condrey at the Christmas Star Wars card in Dallas, but with the new year came new tag champions, as the Midnights beat Rogers and Fulton for the titles on January 11, 1985 at the Sportatorium. And just like in Mid-South, the Fantastics were in the position of being the scrappy tag team chasing the champions, but this time things were presented as a little more even. Rogers and Fulton defeated Condrey and Eaton in several non-title matches at house and spot shows, but the Express would continually get themselves disqualified during title matches to keep the belts. After a controversial DQ win for the Fantastics in a title match at the Sportatorium on March 8, 1985, World Class stripped the American Tag titles from the Midnight Express. The titles would remain vacant until one of the most peculiar botches in wrestling history played out in front of 26,000 fans at Texas Stadium. With the hope of preventing Midnight Express manager Jim Cornette from interfering in a title match at the second annual Memorial Parade of Champions, Bobby and Tommy acquired the services of Little John as a bodyguard. Little John, also known in wrestling as Silo Sam, was anything but little, standing 7 feet 7 inches and weighing about 475 pounds. Visually, Little John was impressive, but he was also very green when it came to working in pro wrestling. At the stadium, Little John would sit next to Cornette to make sure the manager didn't interfere. Because of a big 12-man tag team match on a card that would be held in 2 rings, every match on the card would make use of the 2 rings, and that included the no disqualification match for the American Tag Team titles, which had been vacant for 2 months at that point. There were also 2 referees, with David Manning and Rick Hazard officiating, and all 4 men legal at the same time in either ring. The match itself was fine as matches between the Fantastics and Midnight Express go, but the finish was an absolute mess. The planned finish was Cornette would break away from Little John long enough to interfere and allow Dennis Condrey to pin Bobby Fulton in one ring, but Little John would slap Bobby Eaton's leg in the other ring, distracting him long enough for Tommy Rogers to pin him at the same time. But the pin on Eaton would happen just before the pin on Fulton. Unfortunately, the timing was horrible. Eaton didn't get into position when Little John slapped him the first time. Then referee Rick Hazard was in the way and Little John was unable to slap Eaton again until it was too late. The pin on Rogers happened long before the pin on Eaton, with Manning not even starting the count on Eaton until after Rogers had already taken the 3 count from Hazard in the other ring. At first, the Midnight Express were declared the winners, but after a conference between Manning and Hazard, the decision was reversed, with the only reason given that the pins were simultaneous. It was obvious that they weren't, and the reasoning wouldn't make any sense even if they were, but the Fantastics were leaving with the belts as planned. Despite the bizarre way Rogers and Fulton won the belts the second time around, they would enjoy a 49-day tag title reign before dropping the belts to Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez, then leaving World Class and returning to Mid-South. Bill Watts had promised the Fantastics a run with the Mid-South Tag Championship, but never went through with that promise and put the belts on Al Perez and Wendell Cooley instead. Fulton and Rogers were still paid well, though mostly working mid and upper mid-card matches through most of the latter half of 1985. They feuded through the summer with Dutch Mantell and Bill Dundee, leading to a bull rope on a pole match on Mid-South television, ending in a DQ win for the Fantastics. The feud actually drew to a close with Rogers winning a singles match against Mantell, with the loser getting 5 lashes with the whip. Mixed in with the bull rope feud, Rogers and Fulton also had a great series of matches against Dick Slater and Rogers' old friend Buzz Sawyer, though the Fantastics came out on the losing end more often than not. By the middle of November 1985, it was becoming clear Rogers and Fulton were not going to get the push they were promised, and moved on to familiar territory in the Memphis-based CWA. Though both Rogers and Fulton had spent time in the CWA before, it was their first time there as a team. The first month was mostly uneventful, though they were among the first opponents for a very new and very green tag team called the Freedom Fighters. That team was made up of 2 wrestlers who would go on to be known as the Ultimate Warrior and Sting. In January of 1986, the Fantastics gave a preview of what they would later call one of their most significant feuds with the Sheepherders. In the early and mid-1980s, few teams had a reputation for being more violent than Jonathan Boyd and Rip Morgan. When they were on the card, fans knew there was likely to be blood. 2 good-looking young wrestlers wearing tuxedo-inspired gear that appealed to teenage girls were not the most likely opponents for a team like the Sheepherders, but the 2 teams would go on to have incredible matches. On January 13, 1986, the Fantastics defeated the Sheepherders for the AWA Southern Tag Team Championship in the CWA, then defeated them again in a loser leaves town match just 13 days later. Rogers and Fulton would hold the Southern Tag belts until dropping them to the Mod Squad on March 26th before following the Sheepherders to the former Mid-South territory, which in the 4 months since they had left had been rebranded the Universal Wrestling Federation. In their first match back on March 30th, 1986, Rogers and Fulton defeated the Sheepherders for the UWF World Tag Team Championship in Springfield, Missouri. Bobby and Tommy would show a different side to fans in the series of matches that followed. New Zealand boot camp matches, barbed wire steel cage matches, and even a 6-man tag match in a barbed wire steel cage as the Fantastics teamed with Terry Taylor against the Sheepherders in their second Jack victory. A series of violent, bloody matches ran through July, with the Fantastics winning all of them, retaining the tag titles throughout, and gaining a new respect among fans. The Fantastics would lose the UWF tag titles to Eddie Gilbert and Sting in July and trade the belts back and forth through September before starting another program over the titles with Jack Victory and John Tatum. Rogers would also make some singles appearances in the Alabama-based Continental Championship Wrestling, having a short run there as a Southeastern Heavyweight Champion. By February of 1987, the Fantastics were ready to come back to Dallas and what was now the World Class Wrestling Association. The Fantastics would be put on the fast track to a top spot in the tag team division once back in Dallas, winning the WCWA World Tag Team Championship from Al Madrill and Brian Adias on March 4th in Lubbock, Texas. Their year-long run in WCWA saw a nice series of matches against the Rock and Roll RPMs over the World Tag Team titles, and later clashes with Jack Victory and John Tatum. But it would be a somewhat thrown-together team of Eric Embry and Frank Lancaster that controversially took the tag titles from Fulton and Rogers at the Sportatorium in Dallas on June 26, 1987. Despite the tag titles and feuds, it would be a night in Fort Worth that stood out to Rogers and Fulton years later for all the wrong reasons. An 8-man tag team match had the Fantastics teaming with Kevin Von Erich and Bruiser Brody against Black Bart, Brian Adias, Al Madrill, and Al Perez. Rogers and Fulton had noticed Kevin did not look well, with pale skin and an odd appearance on his back. During what was supposed to be the finish to the match, Kevin was thrown into one of the turnbuckles by Adias, but did not come back out to do what was planned. Adias threw him into the opposite turnbuckle, thinking it was a simple mistake, and they would do the finish on the other side of the ring. When Kevin hit that second time, he fell to the mat and began convulsing. The match stopped, and Fulton went to Kevin to check on him, saying that it was serious. This was real life. Rogers would later say it looked like Kevin's tongue had swollen or almost inverted. Though he had never taken a CPR class, he knew Kevin would need air, so he took action. Rogers moved Kevin's tongue and did mouth-to-mouth until paramedics could arrive at the ring. Though the match was during one of the world-class TV tapings, it never aired on television. World Class covered the incident to fans, saying that Diaz had used his Oriental Tool maneuver, a move where Diaz would strike an opponent on the side of the head with his thumb. What actually caused Kevin's collapse was never made public. Rogers said when he showed up to get his check from Fritz von Erich later in the week, Fritz said, "Thanks for helping my boy," but he didn't need it. The situation left a bad taste in the mouth of both Rogers and Fulton, both of which claimed they considered quitting after it all happened. The Fantastics would stay in World Class through the end of February 1988, before moving on to Ted Turner's WCW. In World Championship Wrestling, which was still associated with the NWA at the time, the Fantastics reignited their feud with the Midnight Express, now comprised of Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane with manager Jim Cornette. Rogers and Fulton defeated Eaton and Lane in their first match in the territory, and by April, the Fantastics beat the Midnights for the United States Tag Team Championship. After a series of gimmick matches that included 2-on-3 handicap matches with Cornette tagging with the Midnights, Rogers and Fulton dropped the belts back to Eaton and Lane in July at the Great American Bash in Baltimore. Rogers and Fulton got the U.S. Tag titles back in December, winning a tournament final over Eddie Gilbert and Ron Simmons in December after the Midnight Express won the NWA World Tag Team Championship, but the reign would be short as they dropped the belts to Steve Williams and Kevin Sullivan just 8 days later. With a crowded field of tag teams in WCW in the late 80s, and with WCW essentially controlling the NWA at that point, Bobby and Tommy decided to try their luck in Japan and began a long run in All Japan Pro Wrestling in January 1989. Despite never winning any tag titles, Japan provided the kind of wrestling both Tommy and Bobby liked, and the Fantastics stayed in Japan through 1996. But they did return to the U.S. on occasion for appearances in WCW, where they picked up wins over enhancement talent, but would then job to the teams like Harlem Heat and the Blue Bloods. After taking the loss in the WCW Saturday Night Dark match against Kenny Chaos and Robbie Rage, the writing was clearly on the wall. After a long, successful run, the Fantastics were going to go their separate ways. Neither Rogers or Fulton did much for several weeks after their match on WCW Saturday Night. Bobby Fulton made appearances in the North Carolina-based All-Star Wrestling, tagging with Rex King against the Rock and Roll Express, and in Tennessee Mountain Wrestling. Meanwhile, Tommy Rogers was brought into the WWF as they were looking to beef up their cruiserweight division. After Rogers' WWF debut, losing to Brian Christopher on WWF Shotgun Saturday Night, he found himself in the unusual position of seeing Bobby Fulton on the other side of the ring. On an episode of Raw is War at the Olympic Center in Lake Placid, New York, Rogers and Fulton faced off against each other as part of the WWF pushing their cruiserweight division. Fulton played the part of the heel, but Rogers would come out the winner in just under 3 minutes. It would be the last appearance either wrestler made in the WWF, as they dropped their idea of bolstering the cruiserweights at the time. Rogers did find some success in ECW, a promotion noted for its hardcore style but oddly still appreciative of high-skill technical wrestlers. Rogers even got a shot at the ECW World Championship against Shane Douglas, but did not win the belt. Rogers stayed in ECW through the end of the 1990s. Fulton spent time in his own big-time wrestling promotion based in Ohio, as well as the New Dimension Wrestling in North Carolina. Bobby would form a new version of the Fantastics with his real-life brother George, wrestling under the name Jackie Fulton. By 1999, Fulton was all but retired from the ring. For the next 5 years, Fulton was inactive, while Rogers made semi-regular appearances in various indie promotions through 2001, and even made a couple of appearances jobbing on WCW Saturday Night. Rogers and Fulton would reunite in 2004 for a week-long run in Japan's IWA, even making an unsuccessful bid for the IWA World Tag Team Championship. 7 months later, Rogers and Fulton defeated the Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey version of the Midnight Express in an event in Waynesboro, Virginia. In January 2005, the Fantastics teamed with Rock and Roll Express to win a 4-on-3 handicap match against Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane, and Dennis Condrey at Wrestle Reunion in Tampa, Florida. That same year, Bobby and Tommy would have their last match together as the Fantastics, and Tommy Rogers' last match of his career at Wrestle Reunion No. 2 in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The Fantastics won a 4-corner tag match against the teams of L.A. Smooth and Samu, David Isley and Gene Ligon, and Johnny Cashmere and Trent Acid. Fulton would continue to wrestle sporadically over the next few years, mostly in his promotion in Ohio, now known as World Classic Big Time Wrestling. Fulton would hold various indie championships, including being the first and only HOW Tag Team Champions with Robbie Starr, and a 7-month run as HLW Tag Team Champions with Tracy Smothers in 2016. In 2019, Fulton was diagnosed with throat cancer, but he not only beat the cancer, he still wrestles occasionally at the age of 61. As of the making of this video, Fulton's last match was on February 13, 2023 in Tampa, Florida, where he wrestled Wrecking Ball Legursky to a draw. After that last match, Tommy Rogers would retire from wrestling and move to Hawaii. Any chance of him returning to the ring disappeared in 2007 when he underwent hip replacement surgery. Rooming with a wrestler named Francis Buxton, Rogers was working in a restaurant, living what Buxton described as a relatively peaceful life with basic ups and downs anyone is going to have. On June 1, 2015, according to Buxton, Rogers was having apparent breathing problems and an ambulance was called to make sure everything was okay. Paramedics gave Rogers a tube for the 10-minute ride to the hospital, but inserted the tube wrong and put it into his stomach instead of his lungs. Rogers went into shock, and within 20 minutes, Tommy Rogers passed away at the age of 54. The Fantastics were often underrated, being lost in the mix with tag teams like the Rock and Roll Express or the Fabulous Ones, but for world-class fans, they are remembered as one of the most popular tag teams to come through Dallas. Rogers and Fulton will forever be champions in the hearts of the Sportatorium crowd.
By the Fantastics, there by the winners, the Fantastics.
Well, Knitsky comes across. The Fantastics are the winners. But I ask you, especially those of you who have been watching this show for years, have you ever seen this happen before? Well, you've seen it tonight.